A warning to listeners. This episode briefly discusses sexual assault and violence against women. If this is uncomfortable to you, please feel free to skip ahead to 235 after the introduction, where the focus will return on the research and business implications. It's been almost a decade since the New York Times released a bombshell report about widespread abuse against women in the upper echelons of Hollywood. In 2017, Harvey Weinstein, then a respected producer, was accused of multiple accounts of sexual assault against a myriad of women in the film and television industry. Since the news broke, more than 80 women have come forward to detail their abuse at Weinstein's hands, and online, a social movement swelled. Women took to Twitter to share their own stories of abuse under the hashtag MeToo. Through the coverage and subsequent movement, it became apparent that many others in Hollywood, from film and TV executives to producers to writers and actors, were not just aware of the abuse of Weinstein and others, in many cases they were also complicit. Other prominent actors and producers were called out for their abusive behavior to both men and women. Some, like Bill Cosby, went to jail for their actions. Others, like Kevin Spacey, were found not guilty in court. Me Too even spread to other industries outside of Hollywood, though perhaps not as effectively. And in the film and TV world, there was a definite change.
Probably about a year after Me Too happened, I started to notice a lot of commentary coming out about the movement, both about the positives of the movement as well as potential downsides. And I remember thinking to myself, I do know how to work with data in Hollywood from prior research, and perhaps I can say something using data systematically and add some evidence to the conversation. So my name is Hong Luo. I'm an associate professor in the strategic management area of Rotman, as well as the econ department. Broadly speaking, my work is about understanding individuals as well as firms' innovation behavior. And the central theme of my research is to understand the role of market-level environment and how that affects such behavior.
Hong wanted to learn more about how such a market-wide social movement like Me Too would actually influence innovation and change. How did it reshape the product that Hollywood made, namely movies and TV shows? And what could it tell us about innovation in times of profound upheaval and crisis? Welcome to the Executive Summary. I'm your host, Megan Haynes, editor of the Rotman Insights Hub. Just one of the top 10 grossing movies in 2017 was directed by a woman, Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, and none of them were written by women. According to the Celluloid Ceiling Report out of San Diego State University, a semi-annual tracking of behind-the-scenes talent in Hollywood, in 2017, women made up just 11% of writers and directors. Gender equality in Hollywood has been a long-standing issue, and over the past few decades, efforts to improve gender balance both on-screen and behind the scenes have seen mixed results. But experts say one of the reasons the widespread sexual abuse in the industry went unreported for so long is the lack of gender diversity on creative teams. And Me Too offered Hong an interesting opportunity to measure whether large-scale social pressure could influence a change in any meaningful way.
The first order question that we asked is whether Me Too movement has led to more working opportunities for female talent, and in particular, female writers in Hollywood. And we just thought the movement, by its magnitude and what it had revealed, could have had an impact on the motivation for the decision makers to make change.
To study this, Hong and Lorena Zhang, an associate professor at Boston University, compared movie teams in the 2.5 years leading up to 2017 and the 2 years after the Me Too movement. More specifically, they looked at how the likelihood of working with female writers changed among producers who had previously worked with Harvey Weinstein compared to the change among production teams that had no relationship with Weinstein. Just noting here, they looked at movie projects that were in very early development. Essentially, a producer had purchased the script and signed some contracts with writers, but the film might not necessarily get to theaters in the end. And the results were pretty startling.
So what we find is that relative to those non-associated producers, those producers who are associated with Harvey Weinstein are about 9 percentage points more likely to work with female writers after Me Too than before.
Basically, after the Me Too movement, all productions saw a spike in women in writers' roles. But producers who had some past affiliation with Weinstein, specifically having worked on a movie with him in the past, were far more likely to buy a script from a female writer or hire a female talent to the writer's room than those that had no affiliation with Weinstein whatsoever. So what drove the behavior change?
The way we hypothesize it is could be twofold. One is sort of motivated by deep literature in sociology about this notion of stigma of association. The idea of birds of a feather, they flock together. If you had worked with Harvey Weinstein, it could be because people may perceive you to share similar traits or be more tolerant about misconduct and toxic culture, and that is some reputation you don't want to have.
Bringing more female talent into the room might be a way of removing or mitigating that taint by association.
I don't think that is the only reason out there. I think that many people in Hollywood, especially gatekeepers like producers, they may have other reasons other than the necessity to mitigate risk to enact change. It could be because the movement itself really highlight some of the phenomenon that they were somewhat aware of, but not aware of the depths of it, or the sudden publicity makes them more alert, more cognizant about these issues and their consequences, and they may feel certain kind of guilt, probably not having done enough before. They may still want to make certain change to the extent they can because they are more aware of these problems or feel more intrinsically motivated to do something about it or feel more empowered to do something about it.
And did the changes to the writer's room make a difference to success?
What we actually see is that the projects developed by teams, including women, are actually more likely to be released in theater if we treat it as a proxy for success. It's more likely to be successful after MeToo than before.
So more women were behind the scenes on movie sets. The next question was, did that result in more women on camera? According to San Diego State University, in 2017, women comprised of just 24% of leading character roles on film, a 2% decline from the previous year. The university found that when the creative team had at least one woman, women made up 45% of protagonists. Without a woman on the creative team, women accounted for just 20% of the roles. Essentially, having a woman as a director or writer is far more likely to result in a female lead character. The caveat here is that even with female talent behind the camera, major Hollywood studios were generally more likely to make movies featuring just male leads.
In our second project, we look at, do we actually observe more projects that are more female-oriented, for example, that feature female protagonists primarily?
And here's where things get interesting. Using the same methodology as the first study, Hong and her colleague looked at female protagonists on films both before and after MeToo, broken down by people who have an association with Weinstein and those without.
If everybody in the team is men, what we observe is that after MeToo, the team is actually more likely to develop female protagonist stories. But if we look at teams that include at least one woman, the opposite happened, meaning they're actually more likely to develop male protagonist projects after MeToo relative to before. The sharp contrast is what we find quite interesting.
On the reasoning behind the shift, Hong is cautious. She doesn't specifically study gender diversity in the workplace, and it is a really complex and sociologically nuanced topic. But generally, when faced with the social pressure of MeToo, there were two ways to respond to such a wide-scale social movement. One was to hire more female talent, the other was to develop more female-led stories. If the production team didn't hire more female talent, then that really only left the on-screen roles. What's also noteworthy is teams that had an association with Harvey Weinstein changed the types of female characters they developed compared to those that had no association with Weinstein.
Regardless of the gender composition of the team, female protagonist stories developed after MeToo by Weinstein associate teams, on average, are less in accordance to traditional gender stereotypes than those female protagonist stories developed by non-associated teams with Harvey Weinstein.
In this case, stereotyping isn't the buxom siren or the dowdy nanny. It's looking at the generally positive traits associated with certain genders, things like assertiveness and ambition for men and caring and compassion for women. So Weinstein-associated teams were less likely to create characters that displayed those characteristics than those that weren't.
These are relatively conforming to traditionally how we think about the female norms versus male norms, which as a result also has huge implications for what society traditionally thinks are roles or jobs that are suitable for women versus men.
Despite its outsized cultural influence, Hollywood is actually a very niche industry. What happens there tends to get a lot more publicity than, say, in construction or banking. So it's worth asking whether a social movement or strong external pressure would have the same impact on other industries like it did with MeToo in Hollywood. Well, to start, let's go back to Hong's other world of research, innovation around risk, which she studies alongside her Rotman colleague, Alberto Galasso.
In the medical device industry, actually, what we look at is how does, say, consumer perception of risk, which is often generated by, say, huge accidents, suddenly revise everybody's notion about how safe a particular kind of product is, and how that may shape, say, medical device producers' innovation behavior. What kind of devices do they design now? What kind of safety features do they put in, etc.
We've talked about this before on the show in the context of AI, but I'll toss in a reminder here. To get something to market quickly, you often have to sacrifice safety features. To get something to market safely, sometimes you have to sacrifice speed. And when you have lots of competition, the desire to get something out quickly and beat the market can result in a less safe product. But in the world of medicine, when someone gets really sick because of a new drug, then suddenly there's external pressure, be it in the form of regulation or public opinion, to address that safety issue. And when the wave is big enough,
there is this market shift in demand for safety, for change, for greater improvement. So this demand shift can actually present promising or profitable opportunities for different kind of innovation strategy. It could drive demand for safety features that were not as profitable before. Or it could be drive profitability or support from everybody in the industry, including the end consumers, for certain kind of projects. So a lot of it could lead to this demand change. But deeper layer of it relates to this notion of coordination in a way. If a single firm wants to, say, provide safety features of a product or make change in terms of gender representation of a team, if only me wants to make a change, it may not be enough because other parties may not be on the same page. If I'm the only one that want to make a change, but I couldn't get support from others, then you can't quite coordinate behavior towards a certain direction or certain project. That's why when you have such massive shock, like the MeToo movement or like huge, say, accidents, medical accidents, that raise the awareness of everybody, that could actually solve the coordination issues.
Like big accidents in the medical world, big social movements have the unintended benefit of forcing companies to think through innovation and change that might not have been profitable before. If suddenly the entire industry has to focus on addressing the root cause of a social movement issue, say greenhouse emissions from your supply chain, worker safety in your factory, or gender diversity on your teams, it becomes more palatable to swallow the costs otherwise associated with the change. But alas, consumer memories can be a bit short. And as we've seen in recent months, there's actually been a pushback against some of the biggest social movements in the past decade.
If the attention to the movement or the intensity of the movement starts to wane, then we may expect the motivational effect could start to fade as well.
So for groups pushing for change, keeping that momentum and pressure on organizations is really important, even if it's incredibly difficult. And Hong reminds us not to lose hope. Systemic change, like movie development, is slow. In 2024, 3 of the top grossing movies had at least 4 women in the director's or writer's seats, more than triple the number in 2017. And the Celluloid report found that in 2024, women accounted for 20% of writing and 16% of director roles, an improvement over 2017 for sure. Change can build on change, even in the absence of some of that social pressure.
And the literature shows that when you actually have more female talent in a particular field, especially if those talent could use that opportunity to gain experience and gain track record, and if we could have more people start to get into decision-making positions, then we may actually sustain change by the short-term change that the MeToo movement has resulted in. So that alone, hopefully, will help sustain more longer-run change.
This has been Rotman Executive Summary, a podcast bringing you the latest insights in innovative thinking from Canada's leading business school. Special thanks to Associate Professor Hong Luo. Join us next month as we chat with Professor Lisa Kramer about how daylight savings and the winter blues shape our investing patterns. This episode was written and produced by Megan Haynes. It was recorded by Dan Mazzata and edited by Avery Moore-Kloss. If you're just tuning in for the first time, check out some of our earlier episodes and make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or Amazon. And finally, for more innovative thinking, head over to the Rotman Insights Hub and subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. We have lots of fantastic research and insights from the entire Rotman community. Thanks for tuning in.